So the topic today is kit bashing, becoming kind of a lost art. It's taking one model or pieces of a model, combining it with one or more other models to create a third model, usually something that you can't just buy off the shelf. The EP5 locomotive, built in Erie, Pennsylvania in the early 1950s by GE and made for the New Haven Railroad, is one of the coolest looking locomotives ever. I saw it with my own eyes when I was just a kid, and I've always wanted a model of it, even when that model was a brass one and it was a little beyond my budget. Of course, there is a plastic model now, but there wasn't one yet when I started my kit bash. Anyway, the EP5 was an incredibly powerful, even with weight restrictions for the Park Avenue viaduct, very powerful, great accelerating electric locomotive that covered the 72 miles from New Haven to Grand Central with tremendous acceleration out of every station stop and really cutting down the time required between the two terminals. Unfortunately, just about 3 years into its service life, the electric locomotive facility that serviced them in Van Nest was closed, and the diesel shop took over the electric repairs, which was very bad for the condition of the locomotives. By 1969, when the New Haven entered the Penn Central, this is what a lot of the locomotives looked like, and one of them in fact burst into flames in the Park Avenue tunnel, and they were banned from that service thereafter. Four of them were in the scrap line already at the time of the absorption by Penn Central. Two of them were found to be repairable to the point where they could be brought to the New York division in New Jersey to be in local freight service, which they were in until 1976 or 77. The other four, which all died in service in the very early 70s on the New Haven division, here you see it rusting, waiting, scrapping. That's one that I chose to model, the 4976. Being pretty much a beginner in kit bashing, I did know that you needed to have something to work with from the beginning, so I figured that there would be two, since the double-ended locomotive required two cabs, there would be two shells needed for an Alco FA1 diesel, which I already happen to have on hand. And then I measured the chassis for the classic Athearn PA1 locomotive and found that it would be just almost to the foot, the exact length that I needed to come close to the original locomotive dimensions. So this is kind of the story of a guy just feeling his way along blindly, trying to at least get started in kit bashing. I'd done one small project before, but nothing that had the difficulty of doing this, so I put the train miniature FA1 shells, as you see here, cut one of them near the back end and the other I cut it just behind the cab and sat those on an Athearn PA1 chassis. It measured out okay, so I was kind of on my way. I glued some coffee stirrers in there just as a rough guide to cut a hole with a small saw in the roof, which I did, and there you can see the motorless PA1 chassis. All of these were rough cuts, and I was going to have to do a lot of filing and sanding and tweaking to get it to go together in a pretty square way. I took the floor of a boxcar there, trimmed a little at the corners because it needed to be beveled a little bit, then put a piece of clear plastic, glued it to the top of the floor so that we'd have a nice flat roof. Just kind of positioned pantographs in on each end that came from an old AHM GG1. Not an exact match for the EP5 pantographs, but I was working with what I had, and this is an approximate model, not some sort of master kit project. I glued clear plastic along the sides to get rid of all that diesel side detail, as the electrics had smooth sides. When this was all done, there was going to have to be a lot of sins covered by some nice putty and also black paint. I determined early on that I was not up to the New Haven paint scheme. And then, as always, it happened. Rapido announced during the middle of my project that they were going to be coming out with an EP5 in HO scale in plastic. Oh well, on we go. I was in this for the learning experience and just the fun of doing it, not for making it a perfect, fine detailed model. One of the things, though, was I had to take that very small square for the coupler to come out of on the FA1 and start filing it away so that it would have enough swing to negotiate the 24-inch tracks that are the minimum radius in my hidden storage tracks on the layout. So I guess as a novice kitbasher, one of the most challenging things I had to do was to sort of move the headlamp downward. If you look at the FA1, there's sort of a box there that's above the top of the nose, and also the number boards are lower. Whereas on the EP5, which is a similar, not identical nose, the number boards are higher and the light is smaller and much lower. So that had to be done with some actual modifications. So you'll see the original hole there. I'd filed that box away. I taped on a photocopy of the New Haven decal, and in that little center part you saw with the Sharpie spot there, I took a pin vise and drilled a tiny hole, which you see below the existing hole. So I was in the process of carefully using fine steel wool to smooth the rounded part of the nose, and then I would fill that hole for the original headlamp and then very carefully drill out a new hole for the lowered headlight. At this point, with the layout still under construction, I just did a little test run to see what it was starting to look like. So one of the details, I tried to find an exact match for the number boards, and I could get close with this Cal scale brass one. I could not find an exact copy of what they had on the EP5, so I used that. So here's what it looked like once I'd puttied everything and smoothed it endlessly with the fine steel wool. I think my sister was visiting. She said, "What is that?" when she saw it on my desk, and I had to nod my head. It didn't look real exciting. But this was just about ready for painting. However, I had to put the vents on there, on the two on each side, and I used the Canon vents that you'll see right here. Cut them a little bit shorter, glued them on the side, and then we are pretty close to ready to actually paint the thing. And as I said, I wasn't going to tempt fate. The New Haven paint scheme was too easy to mess up, so I just decided to make it a Penn Central one for now. And this was kind of a nervous point in the process because that was no guarantee that it was going to look even acceptable once the paint was on. But to my vast surprise, it turned out to be something I could really work with. So next, it was time for the micro scale decals. And I can tell you that the less handling, the better once you get your Kitbash set up, because it can get nicked up and damaged. Got the main decals on there, and then the absolute joy, of putting on 4 separate tiny numbers, times 4, one for each number board. But after going cross-eyed doing that, I just put it on the layout briefly to have a quick look. I didn't have windows for it yet, but I got an FA1 window kit and put that on the front end. Needed a little bit of more weathering. It was too glossy, so I did a little bit of that. I may do more in the future. So having reached a minimum level of detail, which is probably about the maximum that I could manage, especially at that point in my self-education of kit bashing, I decided, let's get it on the rails, let's have it pull some trains, and just sort of see what it looks like. Some Walthers Penn Central cars. I was really pleased with how fast and powerful this locomotive turned out to be, just with an old F30 engine. A little pan shot. Very, very skimpy on detail, but that's helped by the fact that it's A, all painted black, and B, it just roars through the scene so quickly that nobody can fix on any of the details to see how good a job it was. So it was perfect. I just wanted to have one that I could run on my layout. I basically built it out of spare parts that I already had. So it was a very interesting project, and I learned a lot from it, which was all that I hoped to do. And this just kind of sets the scene on the Northeast Corridor in Connecticut in 71 or 2. in an unspecified location with experimental catenary, if you will. Not exactly prototypical. But here comes the EP5, and seeing it run was a real kick. It would not have had Amtrak cars. Those didn't even exist. It would have been a very hodgepodge assemblage of stuff from different railroads. But as I say, it was a fun project to do, and I appreciate your checking out the video to see how it was done. I claim no expertise. There are people that do this way better than me, but it was fun.